now, this was the start of where teams are saying, why aren't we more like the to trade Myles Garrett? The guy would want to win this year. It's like, no, really my job ought to be that in 20 years.
Cleveland Browns have been lying to you, not with dramatic, obvious lies that you can point to and call out in real time, with something far more dangerous. Carefully constructed, corporate polished, media-trained non-answers designed to keep you confused, compliant, and just patient enough to not demand real accountability. They hid behind Deshaun Watson's injury. They hid behind the salary cap. They hid behind vague promises about building something, about turning a corner, about better days ahead. And for years, the fans in Cleveland swallowed it, because what other choice did they have? But something just happened that changes everything. Todd Monken, the head coach of the Cleveland Browns, sat down in front of a microphone and said the quiet parts loud. He named Shedeur Sanders directly. He put a fifth-round rookie in the same sentence as the highest-paid player in franchise history. He talked about a 20-year rebuild. He admitted on camera that no player, not one, is untradeable. And the national media is already trying to spin it, already trying to minimize it, already trying to protect the old narrative. We are not doing that here. Drop a comment right now. Do you think Shedeur Sanders starts before Week 1? Let's find out how many of you already see what's coming.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
No one is beyond getting fired. Okay, so that is all what we deal with in professional sports.
Right.
And then very few players are untradeable.
Here is the thing about NFL head coaches. They are trained, almost from the moment they step into a coordinator role, to say nothing, to communicate in the smoothest, most non-committal language possible, to give you the impression of transparency while revealing absolutely zero information that could be used against them or their organization. It is a skill, a practiced, deliberate, cultivated skill that most coaches spend years perfecting. When you hear a head coach say something that actually means something with real weight and real direction behind it, you need to stop and pay attention, because it does not happen by accident. Todd Monken is not a naive man. He has been in this league long enough to understand that every word he says in a public interview gets dissected, clipped, analyzed, and broadcast to millions of people within hours. He knows the game, which is exactly why what he said on Ryan Ripken's show was so significant. He was not caught off guard. He was not stumbling through an answer he was unprepared for. He chose his words with full knowledge of what they would communicate. And what he chose to communicate was stunning. He was asked directly about the quarterback situation in Cleveland, and he did not reach for the diplomatic escape hatch that was sitting right there in front of him. He did not say, "Deshaun is our starter, and we're excited about what Shedeur can learn this year." He did not offer the standard veteran-first, rookie development non-answer that every other coach in the league would have defaulted to immediately. Instead, he named them both. He said the Browns have to figure out the quarterback situation, whether it is Shedeur, whether it is Deshaun, or whether it is Dylan. Whether it is Shedeur, whether it is Deshaun. Read that back slowly. The head coach of the Cleveland Browns placed a fifth-round rookie draft pick in the exact same grammatical position as the man collecting $230 million in fully guaranteed money. Not below him, not after him, alongside him, with the same tone, with the same weight, with the same complete and total absence of deference toward the veteran. That grammatical equality is not a small thing. In the language of NFL head coaches, where every syllable is calculated, putting those two names in the same breath with the same energy is a declaration. And then Monken went further. He said both Watson and Sanders had really good springs. Really good springs. He did not say Watson looked sharp and Shedeur showed promise. He did not offer the patronizing, veteran-first framing that would have allowed Watson supporters to claim the competition was never really real. He said both, with equal enthusiasm, with genuine energy that was clearly not performative. He was describing what he actually saw on that practice field, and what he saw was a competition, a real one that he was not prepared to call in favor of either player. When was the last time you heard a Browns coach talk about the quarterback room like that? Think about it. Drop gridiron in the comments if you see what's actually happening in Cleveland.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
Let's talk about what it actually means that Shedeur Sanders showed up to Cleveland Browns training camp ready to compete on day one. Because the narrative around this kid going into the draft was one of the most deliberately poisoned stories in recent NFL history, and the people who poisoned it are hoping you have already forgotten what they said. Before the draft, the whispers started. Then the whispers became headlines. Shedeur was labeled as a marketing project, a name, a brand, the son of a controversial figure whose shadow was so long that it apparently made some evaluators incapable of watching film objectively. Teams that desperately needed a quarterback, teams that were openly discussing their quarterback problems in public, teams that had every reason in the world to take a highly skilled, highly accurate, NFL-ready passer in the early rounds. Those teams passed, again and again, round after round, until Shedeur Sanders, one of the most productive college quarterbacks in recent memory, slid to the 5th round and landed in Cleveland. And here is what he did when he got there. He did not sulk. He did not demand a meeting with ownership to complain about his draft position. He did not show up with the kind of entitled energy that you might expect from a player who had been told his entire life that he was destined for greatness. He showed up and he worked. He competed. He treated his position on the depth chart not as an insult to be avenged, but as a challenge to be met. And his head coach noticed. That matters for reasons that go beyond football optics. Because what Shedeur's arrival at training camp actually represents is the beginning of a reckoning that the Cleveland Browns organization has been quietly engineering for months. Think about the sequencing here. The Browns draft Shedeur in the 5th round, which keeps the financial commitment manageable and the pressure off the franchise publicly. They let the offseason play out with Watson nominally holding the starting job, which keeps the locker room stable and the veteran from becoming a distraction. And then training camp arrives, the pads go on, and suddenly the head coach is on a nationally distributed show naming the rookie in the same breath as the veteran with no deference and no protective framing. That is not random. That is a carefully managed transition being executed in real time. The Browns are not going to announce that Shedeur Sanders is their future and Deshaun Watson is yesterday's news. They are not going to hold a press conference and say the quiet part loud in those exact terms. Instead, they are going to let the competition play out publicly, let Monken's carefully chosen words do the signaling work, and let the results on the practice field tell the story that the front office cannot officially tell yet. And Shedeur Sanders, for his part, is playing his role perfectly. He showed up ready. That is not a small thing. Most NFL teams operate on a 2 to 3 year window mentality. You build for now. You chase the Super Bowl. You make the moves that maximize your chances in the current season and worry about the future when the future gets here. It is a short-sighted philosophy that has destroyed more franchises than it has saved. But it is the dominant operating mode of the league because the pressure to win immediately is relentless, and the patience of ownership groups is almost universally limited. The Cleveland Browns just told you they are doing something different. Todd Monken did not bury this. He did not whisper it. He said it directly on camera with his name attached to it. His goal, his personal professional goal as the head coach of this franchise, is to build something that 20 years from now the rest of the NFL is looking at Cleveland and asking themselves why they are not more like the Browns. 20 years. That is not a 2-year window. That is not a postseason push. That is a generational commitment to building an organization from the ground up with the kind of structural integrity and long-term thinking that produces sustained excellence rather than occasional relevance. And the moment you hear that, the moment that philosophy lands, everything else the Browns have done in the past calendar year snaps into focus with a clarity that is almost shocking. Why did they trade Myles Garrett? Because a 20-year vision does not protect current assets just because they are great. It converts current assets into future infrastructure when the math says that is the right move. Why did they accumulate draft capital? Because a 20-year vision is built on having the resources to develop talent, to make mistakes and correct them, to build depth across the roster rather than concentrating value in a few expensive veterans. Why did they hire Todd Monken? Because a 20-year vision requires a coaching staff that thinks architecturally, that builds systems and cultures rather than just drawing up plays and managing personalities. And why is Shedeur Sanders in that quarterback room competing for the starting job right now? Because a 20-year vision does not hand the franchise centerpiece role to a 30-year-old quarterback on a legacy contract with a catastrophic injury history. A 20-year vision identifies a young, talented, hungry quarterback and puts him in a position where he can develop, compete, earn his job, and then anchor the offense for the next decade and beyond. Now here is the uncomfortable part of this conversation. The part that Browns fans who have been waiting for a winner for decades are going to have to sit with for a moment. A 20-year vision means accepting that this year is probably not the year. It means accepting that the process is more important than the result in 2025. It means trusting a head coach and a front office that, candidly, have not yet earned that trust through results. But it also means that what is being built in Cleveland right now might actually be real. Let's be precise about what the Myles Garrett trade actually was, because the way it got covered in the national media was almost criminally lazy. The headline was simple and devastating. Browns trade best player in franchise history. And if you read only the headline, you walked away with the impression of an organization in freefall stripping assets, waving the white flag on the present and the near future simultaneously. That impression is wrong, not slightly wrong. Fundamentally, structurally wrong in a way that tells you more about the people writing those headlines than it does about the actual transaction. Here is what the Browns got. Shedeur Sanders, a young edge rusher who profiles as one of the more talented defensive players in the league at his age. A first-round draft pick, a second-round draft pick, another second-round draft pick, a third-round draft pick, and nearly $30 million in cap space that comes off the books and opens up flexibility that this franchise has not had in years because of the Watson contract. That is the trade, not Myles Garrett for Shedeur Sanders. Myles Garrett for Shedeur Sanders plus 4 premium draft selections plus a massive infusion of financial flexibility. When you lay it out that clearly, the trade stops looking like a surrender and starts looking like exactly what Todd Monken said it was. A calculated, surgical decision made by an organization that has chosen to prioritize the future with complete ruthless conviction. And here is the layer underneath that decision that nobody wants to engage with honestly. You do not make that trade if you believe your current roster is a Super Bowl contender. You do not trade your best defensive player for future capital if you think one more good free agent signing or one more healthy season from your veteran quarterback puts you in the conversation for a championship. You make that trade when you have done an honest assessment of where you are, accepted the reality of what that assessment tells you, and decided that the path forward requires dismantling what you have in order to build something better. The Browns did that assessment. They accepted the reality, and they made the trade. Todd Monken, to his enormous credit, did not try to dress this up in language designed to obscure the decision. He acknowledged the calculus directly. He made clear that this was not a desperate move born from dysfunction, but a deliberate move born from clarity. He said this was the start of building something that the rest of the league would look at and want to replicate. And he said it with the calm, convicted energy of a man who genuinely believes in the process he is executing. Now here is the question that follows directly from all of this. When you have accumulated that much draft capital, when you have created that much cap space, when you have explicitly committed to a 20-year generational rebuild, who is the quarterback you are building it around? Because it is not the guy whose contract is already paid, and there is only one other option on that roster right now. This is the part of the conversation that I think is going to age the most significantly. This is the moment from that interview that is going to get replayed 6 months from now, when everything that is currently happening in Berea becomes undeniable even to the most committed Watson defenders. Because what Monken said about the nature of transparency in professional football was not a throwaway philosophical observation. It was a direct, on-camera admission about how this organization actually operates behind the language they use publicly. He was asked about the gap between what teams say publicly and what they actually believe internally, about the fact that coaches and general managers can never be fully transparent, because the things they say publicly have real consequences for the locker room, for player negotiations, for the competitive landscape. And Monken's answer was the kind of honest that makes you sit up straight when you hear it. He said that no general manager is ever going to stand up and tell you that every player on the roster is tradable. But that does not mean it is not true. He said very few players are truly untradeable. He said you always have to listen when a team calls. Always. No exceptions. No sacred cows. No player whose contract or history or public relationship with the organization makes them immune to the phone ringing and the conversation starting. Sit with that for a second. The head coach of the Cleveland Browns just told you in the clearest possible language that the Deshaun Watson contract does not protect Deshaun Watson. The organizational commitment does not protect him. The public statements of support and belief do not protect him. If the right call comes in, you listen. You always listen. That is not a general observation about how the NFL works. That is a specific, targeted, carefully delivered signal about where this particular quarterback stands in this particular organization at this particular moment in time. Because here is the thing. When coaches make broad philosophical observations about the business of football, they almost always make them in a context where they do not apply to anyone on their current roster who matters. You talk about roster flexibility in the abstract when you are comfortable with your roster. You talk about the tradability of players in general terms when none of your important players are actually on the trading block. But when a head coach makes those same observations in an interview where he has just spent 5 minutes naming a rookie quarterback alongside his veteran starter as equal competitors, the broad philosophical observation is not broad or philosophical at all. It is pointed, it is specific, and it is aimed directly at the conversation that the Browns cannot have publicly because the financial and locker room consequences of having it explicitly would be too disruptive to manage. Monken cannot say Deshaun Watson may be moved before the season starts, but he just said everything except that. And the difference between what he said and what he cannot say is smaller than anyone in the national media is willing to admit right now. Let's talk about Deshaun Watson without the spin, without the careful organizational language, without the "we believe in Deshaun" press release energy that has surrounded this quarterback for the past 2 years while he has been unavailable, underprepared, and underperforming against every reasonable standard you could apply to a player drawing that kind of money. The Watson situation in Cleveland is one of the most remarkable organizational failures in the history of modern professional football. And I do not mean that as a moral judgment about Watson as a person. I mean it as a pure football and financial assessment. The Browns handed this quarterback a fully guaranteed contract worth over $230 million, fully guaranteed, every cent, regardless of performance, regardless of availability, regardless of whether he played 1 snap or 50 games. That money was going out the door from the moment the contract was signed. And what did the Browns get for it? A combined handful of games. An injury that kept him off the field for most of the past 2 seasons. and an organizational reputation that took a hit so severe it will be studied in NFL business courses for the next 20 years as a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting desperation drive roster construction. Watson is not the villain of this story. The front office that signed that contract is the villain of this story. Watson did not hold a gun to their heads and demand the money. They gave it to him willingly, desperately, because they had been without a franchise quarterback for so long that they convinced themselves the risk was worth taking. It was not. And now they are living with the consequences of that conviction, while simultaneously trying to quietly engineer a path out of the situation that preserves as much dignity as possible for everyone involved. Here is where Watson actually stands right now. He is the nominal starter. He holds that title because the contract demands at least the public performance of organizational commitment. He is going into training camp with every opportunity to prove that he is healthy, sharp, and capable of commanding this offense at a high level. And if he does that, if the pads go on and Watson looks like the genuine franchise quarterback that the Browns paid him to be, then the competition stays a competition, and the season plays out with more uncertainty than anyone currently projects. But if the pads go on and Watson looks like a quarterback who is still finding his way back from a serious injury, still working through the mechanical rust and the timing issues and the confidence gaps that come with extended time away from live football, then the competition becomes something else entirely. Then the competition becomes a clock, a countdown, and Shedeur Sanders becomes less of a competitor and more of an answer. Every single day of training camp, Watson is going to be evaluated against a rookie who has absolutely nothing to lose and everything to prove. That is not a comfortable position for a veteran. That is pressure. Real, unrelenting, career-defining pressure. And Todd Monken just told the world it is exactly where both of them are. There is a reason that the phrase "pads going on" carries so much weight in NFL training camp coverage. And it is not just the physical escalation of the practices or the increased intensity of the competition on the field. It is what the pads reveal about quarterbacks specifically. Because up until the pads go on, you can manage a quarterback competition. You can keep the environment controlled. You can protect both players from situations that would expose weaknesses or create embarrassing moments that the media gets to run with for a week. In shorts and helmets, a quarterback competition is largely about mechanics and mental processing, and the kind of surface-level accuracy that tells you a player knows the system and can execute in a clean pocket with no real pressure. When the pads go on, all of that management disappears. Defensive linemen start getting to the quarterback, not wrapping him up, but getting there. Getting close enough that the quarterback feels the rush in his peripheral vision, close enough that the timing of his release gets tested in ways that shorts and helmets simply cannot replicate. Receivers run routes knowing that a mistake in their route or their release means they are going to take a hit from a safety who is locked in and competitive. The whole energy of the practice changes. The margin for error collapses. And the quarterback's real qualities, his toughness, his decision-making under pressure, his ability to feel the rush and still deliver the ball accurately to the right spot at the right time, all of that gets exposed in ways that cannot be managed or softened or explained away. For Deshaun Watson, the pads going on is a test that carries an enormous amount of weight, because the questions about his health, about his timing, about whether he can still be the player that the Browns believed they were acquiring when they signed that contract, none of those questions can be answered in shorts and helmets. They get answered when a defensive end who is competing for a roster spot hits the edge full speed, and Watson has to make a decision in under 2 seconds with real consequence attached to it. For Shedeur Sanders, the pads going on is an opportunity, pure and simple, because everything that the pre-draft process tried to say about him, every whisper about his readiness, every skeptical take about whether he can handle the speed and physicality of the NFL level, all of that gets answered on the practice field when the conditions are real, when the pressure is real, when the competition is real. And based on everything his head coach just said publicly about his spring, based on the energy and the enthusiasm that Monken brought to the description of Sanders' development, the expectation is that Sanders is going to meet that test. And when that happens, when the pads go on and the results start to speak louder than any press conference or media session, the conversation in Cleveland is going to shift in a direction that no amount of organizational spin can redirect. I want to step back from the organizational calculus for a moment and talk about Shedeur Sanders as a person, because I think the human story of what this young man has navigated to get to this point is genuinely remarkable, and it deserves to be told with the weight it carries rather than reduced to a subplot in a story about the Browns' roster decisions. Shedeur Sanders went into the 2025 NFL Draft carrying a burden that no quarterback prospect in recent memory has had to carry. He was not just being evaluated as a football player. He was being evaluated through the lens of his father, through the noise of a college program that attracted more media attention than any program in the country, through the perception that he was somehow a product of circumstance rather than a product of genuine talent and genuine work. The draft process became a circus in a way that had very little to do with his actual ability to play quarterback at the NFL level, and very much to do with the outside forces that surrounded everything associated with the Sanders family brand. Teams that needed quarterbacks passed on him, over and over, round after round, and with each round that passed, the narrative got louder and more damaging. By the time he landed in the 5th round in Cleveland, the consensus take in certain corners of the football media was that the draft had rendered its verdict, that the market had spoken. That Shedeur Sanders was not what his college numbers suggested, not what his supporters claimed, not the franchise-level prospect that his most ardent defenders believed him to be. But here is what Shedeur Sanders did with that verdict. He rejected it, not loudly, not with the kind of social media defiance or press conference bravado that would have given his critics exactly the narrative they were looking for. He rejected it quietly, privately, in the one place where it actually matters. He went to work. He showed up in Cleveland with the mentality of a competitor, not the entitlement of a brand. He earned genuine praise from his head coach during a spring program that gave him his first real extended look at NFL-level coaching and NFL-level systems. And now, he is walking into training camp with his head coach putting his name alongside a $230 million veteran quarterback without a single qualifier attached. That arc from 5th-round slight to genuine starting quarterback competition on one of the most scrutinized rosters in the league is not a small thing. That is the kind of story that defines careers. The kind of story that, told correctly, becomes the foundation of a legacy. The kind of story that fans point to years later and say, that was the moment. That was when we knew. We might be in that moment right now. And the people who passed on Shedeur Sanders in rounds 1 through 4 are going to be answering questions about that decision for a very long time. Here is what we know. Todd Monken said Shedeur Sanders' name alongside Deshaun Watson with zero deference toward the veteran. He described a 20-year rebuild that makes a rookie the logical centerpiece and a veteran the bridge being quietly phased out. He admitted on camera that no player is untradeable and you always have to listen. And he did all of it deliberately, with full knowledge of what his words would communicate to anyone paying close enough attention. The Browns traded their greatest defensive player for the future. They accumulated picks. They opened cap space. They hired a coach with a generational vision. And then they drafted a quarterback who showed up to training camp ready to compete from day one without hesitation and without ego. Every single piece of this points in the same direction. Now here is the question that I need you to answer in the comments, and I want you to be direct. No hedging. No diplomatic non-answers. After everything you just heard, do you believe Shedeur Sanders wins the starting job in Cleveland before this season ends? Yes or no? Drop it below. Browns fans, I especially want to hear from you, because I think something real is being built in Cleveland. And this might be exactly where it starts.